These guys did some really unusual things, not really guitar friendly stuff. But this song's been running through my head a lot. Oh, it is Friday, March 28th. We're almost a quarter of the way through the year. I guess at the end of March, that's got to be 90 days after 2 months of 31 and 1 month of 28, right? Anyway, we're coming up on the end of the first quarter of the year. And for some reason, Steely Dan, this tune in particular has been running through my head because one of my students is working on it, but he's working on a vocal version. And it reminded me that this was in the COVID days, so it's about 5 years ago, we got in touch with Bob McAlpine, a phenomenal guitarist and musician, who put out an album called Only a Fool Would Play That. And it is his take on a bunch of Steely Dan tunes. And they're all solo guitar. I think they're all solo. Most of them are on the electric guitar, though. And Bob did some lessons for us. He did some great arrangements of tunes. A Stevie Wonder tune, Living for the City, Come Together, Phil Collins tune. Anyway, I can't remember them all right now, but we have about 8 or 9 arrangements that Bob did of solo guitar versions that are approachable. Sometimes mine get a little out of control. And his version of Deacon Blues is what I started looking at again a few days ago. It opens up with these really interesting chords. This is just a major 7 chord played out of the E family. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some unusual, I'm going to talk about triads and chord voicings today. Today's challenge, we're going to call this one the 3-string challenge. Oh, brilliant. I'll come back to that. But let me see if I can play a little of this. This is not under the fingers yet. Anyway, then it goes off into a second verse. I'll try to have that together by next week. We'll see what happens. But a couple of cool things did happen this week. Nesh put together a really neat lesson for us this week. Solitaire, a tune I wasn't as familiar with as many people, many Carpenters tunes. It's sort of off my radar, but it was a Neil Sedaka tune that Neil Sedaka recorded first, and then of course Karen Carpenter put her touch on it. And Nesh's lesson has some great, just fairly really straightforward finger picking going in it. So be sure to take a look at that. And I keep harping on or encouraging people to upload videos for review. And a couple of weeks ago we got one. Rich put out his version of the Joe Walsh tune that Nesh did a lesson on, Help Me Through the Night. Which is really interesting because usually when it's in an open G tuning, and when you're in an open tuning, usually you don't have complicated things going on with your left hand as far as unusual chords. So it's a bunch of relatively easy chord shapes, but there are some rhythmic challenges in that tune, and I address that. So if you take a look at Rich's upload in the student uploads section, and my response to Rich, and then I'd like to see if it improves in the next week or two, because there's some challenging things going on in that. The big news around here, I didn't tell you there was big news, but there's something really cool happening. I think in the early days of TG, we had a reasonable way for you to save lessons, keep like your favorite lessons, and so it was always easy to go back to wherever you left off. And we've been working on our brilliant engineer in Ukraine has put together an extension for Chrome, and we're working on another one for Safari that will will let you do exactly that. You'll be able to save your lessons and just go back and hit this extension in Chrome in your browser, and it'll bring you right back to the whatever tunes you've been working on. So it should be ready in a couple of days. So sometime next week we'll have that up and live, and you'll be able to. We'll be looking forward to hearing how it's going for everybody. What I want to talk about today, though, was I've talked quite a bit about using triads as a second guitar part. And my whole lesson on my whole little course called Lead Secrets, Triads, is built on notes on the top 3 strings out of the three of the 5 families. Now, when I talk about a family, let's back up there first. When I talk about a family, I'm talking about the arrangement of the 3 notes that make up a chord, where the 5 families are different shapes of open chords, and they happen to be C, A, G, E, and D. I would usually not think of them in that order, except that this is one of the places you hear the term caged used, and that's what those 5 letters have in common on the guitar, among other things. But those are the 5 open chords you can play: A, not B; C, D; E, not F; and G. So of our 7 natural letters, 5 of them you can play as open major chords, and each one has a different arrangement of the parts of the chord: the root, the third, and the fifth. Well, if I want to play just a triad and only play one of every note, there are a bunch of different ways I can do that. I can use different strings. In particular, what we're going to talk about here is using adjacent strings. 3 adjacent strings that have one of each note in them. Now, the 3 main families that we think about for that are 2 of our bar chord families: the E family and the A family. And then there is the D family. And in my course on triads, I really just talk about using the top 3 strings. So here's my D shape. In this case, I moved it up to the 5th fret. And this has one of each of the notes in it. In the D family, or the D shape, of the 3 strings I'm playing, the root is on the middle string, which is the 2nd string. The 3rd is on the highest string, and the 5th is on the 3rd string. So this arrangement of notes from low to high is 5, 1, 3. So, got that? Looking at the other 2 families, the A family looks like this. This would be a note at the 5th, and then 2 at the 7th. And the E family would be 2 at the 5th, and the 3rd string at the 6th. So 3 different families I just did. They're all based around the 5th fret. The D shape, which is 5th fret, 6th fret, 5th fret, from 1st to 2nd to 3rd. The A shape, or the A family, which is 5, 7, and 7. And the E family, which is 5, 5, 6. And those are all the major chords. We'll save for next week to talk about minors and 7s and other things, and diminished and augmented. Probably won't even get there. But the challenge, the 3-string challenge, is take each of those families and figure out how to take the note on the highest string down an octave so we're going to take the 1st string out of the equation and replace that note with the same note on the 4th string. And you'll end up with something like that. And then the same thing here. So that would be what I would call the middle strings challenge. And that, or not challenge, but now we're talking about using the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th strings to play the same 3 notes that we just had on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd strings. So I would call the 1st strings the top strings. I would call the next set the middle strings. The next set I would call the lower strings. And the bottom set I would call the bottom strings. So each of those terms I just threw out represents a group of 3 strings. The top strings, 1, 2, and 3. The middle strings, 2, 3, and 4. The lower strings, 3, 4, and 5, and the bottom strings, 4, 5, and 6. Every one of those can be spread out to be, or can give you the notes of a triad. So just for an example, I shouldn't give you the answers here. I should let you figure this out. But one's going to look like this, one's going to look like this, one's going to look like this, and the bottom one is going to look and sound like that. So right there, I just went through, and that actually turned out to be what I would consider two different families. The D family is kind of tied, it's a cousin to the C family. So we don't really need to think about all 5 families. Okay, I think that's enough. Hopefully you get the idea. Is see if you can figure out how to play a triad on each of those 4 sets of strings, top, middle, lower, bottom, and what they would be at each spot. Okay, I should shut up and play something. So I don't think I had any other announcements that I really wanted to make today. Let's see. Here's something else one of my students was working on lately. About changing the progression to something a little more, what's the progression I'm looking for now? I don't have a name for it, but I want to hear an ending something like this. As you're listening to this, hopefully you're hearing the progressions of 1s, 4s, and 5s. I'm just messing around with blues progressions in the key of E, or now in like no key at all, but I'm going from chord 1 to 4, back to 1, to 5, back to 1, 4, 1, 5. Ooh, this is where I needed that different turnaround. Let me try that again. That ending should have been. did you hear that mode change going from blues to minor? So all the rest of that stuff was in E minor as opposed to E blues. Last thing I'll talk about is what made it bluesy. Two things. I was playing E's, A's, and B's, but not just as major chords. They all had the addition of the seventh, and that's what made it bluesy. My E chord, by bringing in a D, one of what we call a blue note in this key, the flatted seventh. Then it goes to an A chord, and by making the A a seventh, it's bringing in a G natural, which is the flatted third in the key, but also a flatted seventh on the chord. So those two notes in the key of E, G natural and D natural, what I was doing right there was hammering on from G to G sharp. And that's what gave us kind of a bluesy sound, and then bringing in the D. On my A chord, I could do the same thing. I could sort of slide into the major third. And then B7. And I kept using a G natural in the bass, coming back down there. So there are basically three notes that turn things into blues that are called blue notes, and they happen to be the flatted third, the flatted seventh, and occasionally the flatted fifth. In the key of E. So that would be G natural, B flat, and D natural. Okay. Had no intention of going off into blues today. I was mostly going to talk about triads. So I hope you got something out of that. If not, I hope you had a good time just like listening and maybe grooving along. I'll see you next week.